All right. I want to welcome everybody to our May 2021 Charlotte area SharePoint user group meeting. Typically in a non-pandemic world, we meet face to face, but we've been remote here for a year, and the hybrid is opening up. Our audience are people outside of the Charlotte area joining in this evening. So welcome. We meet on the third Thursday of every single month. You'll find us on Meetup, Charlotte Area SharePoint User Group. You also find us on YouTube and Twitter and LinkedIn and all the social media channels, Charlotte Area SharePoint User Group. So feel free to join up with us. We do host past recordings. We've got inside of there discussion boards. People ask questions. There's job postings that are also posted there. We've got a couple of agencies that are that have sponsored and work with us, and they have some opportunities, including a couple of volunteer opportunities. So keep your eyes peeled for that. You'll find most of that though in the meetup. That's where we're most active. Let's see, housekeeping wise, just mentioned a couple minutes ago, we've already got our June and July meetings set up. We'll be doing some Teams provisioning and templating with Christina Wheeler in June. And then in July, we are going to have Joanne Klein join us to talk about compliance, security label or sensitivity labels, and everything related to security and compliance in Microsoft 365. She's got a really good topic lined up. Can't wait to share that one. So those meetings are lined up. We'll let you know about August, September when we start to line up speakers there. So with that, I want to go ahead, introduce tonight's speaker, give her the gift of time and let her talk about this awesome subject that we are here to discuss, which is SharePoint Intranets and Microsoft Viva. I'd like to welcome Sue Hanley to our little user group down here in the Charlotte area. So if you never met or haven't met Susan before, she is, for me, the intranets guru. When it comes to SharePoint intranets, the governance related around that, she is the expert's expert. I've known Sue now for quite a number of years. We met originally on the SharePoint Fest circuit. I believe it was SharePoint Fest DC. I believe that was the first one that that we met at. That would have been 2014, 2015, somewhere around in there. But Sue is a Microsoft MVP. She is an accomplished blogger, author, speaker, and she's pretty in demand. So we're really fortunate to have her joining us here tonight. So welcome.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here. And I guess you didn't, thank God, mention that the other thing we share in common is that you have a son and I have a granddaughter who are approximately the same age. Because that would, of course, remind everyone how old I am. But we're just not going to talk about that.
Nope, we will not talk about that.
Right.
My young toddler running around. He'll probably be in the background at some point. Need some dad time. I'll go run around him in the backyard after we're done here this evening. Well, thanks so much for joining us here this evening. And when I reached out to you about this like a month and a half ago, we were talking about the topic, and I brought up, how about we have a discussion on SharePoint intranets and Microsoft Viva, because we were fresh off of the Viva announcement from Microsoft, and then there were some changes that had been in the works in the SharePoint world going back to like last year. And that got rolled into this thing that is Viva, and a lot of people have questions about what's actually going on in their tenants and in their environments, and where kind of the future of a lot of this is actually headed. I'm just going to quickly share my screen because I want to kind of point something out that fits in with this discussion. So sharing my screen, you should all be able to see that. And what I want to kind of point out is this thing that popped up here recently in a lot of our SharePoint sites, SharePoint Online. I've seen a whole bunch of people asking about some of this in their tenants, and some people are like, how do I get rid of it? And they don't understand what it is. But this is what I was talking about, was something that's actually been in the works for a little while now. And it just goes to kind of supplement what Microsoft has been trying to do, or transitioning SharePoint with, rather, is into something that's more of an intranet, something that is more than, for a lot of people, just a place to store documents, a replacement for a file share. That's how a lot of us got into this crazy SharePoint world. Was we migrated off of file shares, and everybody's like, we're going to SharePoint, and more like, what's a SharePoint and why is the P capitalized? And then we start with document libraries, we grow into things like lists, we start working with site pages. And then at some point, we start building kind of these authoritative sources for big departments and business units and divisions. We start to flatten things out and work with hubs. And then all of a sudden, we have this thing called news that gets introduced, and we can have a news service where we can publish news announcements and updates, and we can meet people where they work, whether it's in our SharePoint as part of like web parts on a page, or as part of like our SharePoint home experience. It even meets us on our mobile device if we're using the SharePoint app. And in some situations, we're even seeing it start to show up inside of like Microsoft Teams and kind of bleed over to there. So SharePoint's evolving, and it's way more than it used to be. So we wanted to have a conversation and talk about intranets and how to get started with intranets, and what's happening, what are some of the changes that are going there, and what's this thing Viva, and how is this going to impact us as we're trying to build out this this whole intranet scenario.
Yep, so great topic. And just to sort of segue into what we were going to talk about. So Andy, you originally said to me, you don't have to make a lot of slides. Let's just have a dialogue. And I thought, well, I've been talking about this a lot. So let me see if I can pull together like 10 slides. 46 slides later, I said, Andy, I can't do it. I need to tell the whole story. So how about if I tell the story? Because I want to just take a step back and put everything in context, and then throw in how Viva fits in. Because I think what a lot of people are worried about is, well, what about all the stuff I've already done, the investments I've made in my intranet? Like, how does that fit into this new world, and what should I be thinking about? And I'm an information architect and a business analyst. I spend most of my time helping organizations build intranet and collaboration solutions. So I don't want to go right into what Viva is. I really want to sort of take a step back and say, what makes a great intranet? Then I'll tell you how Viva sits on that, or how it fits within that concept. Because I think one of the things that we tend to lose when we hear about these new shiny objects is, let's go do that. So I'll put it in context. I promise I'll talk about it. And I'll even also talk about that thing that is going to pop up pretty much in every tenant by the end of this month. But before we do that, I thought I would begin with a sad and sobering thought, is that unfortunately, even today, most intranets fail to meet their initial goals. And what we've all learned from the past 18 months is how important it is to be able to communicate with everyone in the organization where and when they work. My life has been like crazy, insanely busy, because so many people really wished that they had started a lot earlier, especially because one of the things we've learned when everyone moved from the office to home is how important it is to remain connected. And intranets can be a really great way to make that happen. So what I want to talk about is what makes a great intranet, and then we'll throw in, of course, how does Microsoft Viva fit with that? Because honestly, you can't have, you need to start with a great intranet, and then use and you need to think about some things before Viva even is going to make sense for your organization. So I often start with what kind of an intranet do you have today? Do you have a traditional intranet? Maybe it's on-prem, or maybe you already have kind of moved things to the cloud. Now, one of the things that, Andy, I think I agree with you that when we all started with SharePoint, the primary artifact that we kept in SharePoint was documents. Great intranets are not made of documents. In fact, like dinged an intranet I'm working on from a client this week because they're throwing just an entire document library on the homepage of a department site. I'm like, seriously? There was a Q&A or frequently asked questions, and one of the questions was, where is our W-9? And the answer was, find it in the document library, not a hyperlink to the actual document, which would have been very helpful to an intranet reader. It was go find it in the big mess of crap we put in the document library that we're displaying on our homepage. So I want to make sure that as we're thinking about what makes a great modern intelligent intranet, first thing, you got to be in the cloud. So you can't take advantage of Microsoft Viva unless you are in a modern intranet in the cloud. So step one is you got to start thinking about, how am I going to get myself to Microsoft 365 if I'm on-prem? And so, not just what kind of intranet do you have, but what kind of intranet do you want? You definitely want a modern intranet. And what I think primarily, one way to easily tell what kind of an intranet you have is that you have got a structure of your intranet based on the org chart, meaning that the way I will find content is by understanding first which department is responsible for it, and then I have to understand the content. But that just isn't how people work. They don't think about how you are organized as a company because, by tomorrow, that's probably changed, because the one thing we do all the time is reorganize. What people really are thinking about is what they need to do and the experiences that they need to have. And sometimes that may mean multiple departments working together to create a great experience for employees. For me, one of the best things about Microsoft Viva is that it's being played as an employee experience, requiring cooperation and conversation between not just HR, not just for HR, who has traditionally focused on employees, but also bringing HR, communications, and IT together to think more holistically about the kinds of experiences we are bringing to employees, basically trying to make sure that we're getting the right information to the right people at the right time. And instead of only representing the org chart, we want our intranet to represent the experiences that our organization or that our employees really need to have. So by the way, great intranets have already been doing this. The last 8 years, I've been a judge at one of the global, I call it an intranet beauty pageants. It's the Step 2 Digital Workplace Awards. And I can tell you from having looked at hundreds and hundreds of intranets that people are really, really proud of. The one thing that I'll say is that the intranets that we typically award prizes to already do all the things that Microsoft Viva is going to facilitate your enablement. They've just invested in those same capabilities. The really brilliant thing about Viva is it's going to bring those capabilities to more organizations without having to create them on their own. So successful intranet and digital workplaces are going to have all kinds of great things. They have a clear vision. They're focused on people. They have a governance plan so that there is a commitment to keeping content up to date, so that when I find content on the intranet, I know I can trust it. And instead of being focused on just delivering the org chart, it's really focused on delivering activities and experiences for me as an employee that represent what I need to do. And someone cares about it. And so, I often say that it's sort of like having a garden. You have to tend it. You have to get rid of the dead weeds. You have to pay attention to where things are growing and what people are searching for and how active things are in order to be successful. So an intranet cannot be set it and forget it, and you really are never done. So ultimately, you want things to be usable, useful, and up to date. And in order to really make that happen, I think you stop saying what's important to the intranet and instead focus on what's important to the organization. What are our big rocks? What do we need to accomplish as an organization? And how can we leverage this new capability that we have with this holistic facing intranet in order to get that. So you really want to think about business value, because you're never going to get funding for phase 2 or the ongoing development of your intranet unless you're delivering value to the intranet, to the organization. Can't just be about news, because that's not going to be enough to move the needle. In order to do this, there are some foundational things that we need to think about that are critical to great intranets, but even more critical to the success of a Viva deployment. And that is that you have to understand the people who are going to use the intranet. Virtually every capability in Viva Connections, which is the part of Microsoft Viva that is most applicable to your intranet, are going to work better and more effectively if you can target those experiences to the individuals who need that, who are most interested in that content or experience. And in the land of SharePoint, the way that we do that is via target audiences. In order to understand what's meaningful from an audience perspective, you actually have to understand those key personas or groups of people who are coming to the intranet to receive services. And that really means understanding your organization, what kind of roles people play and what services those roles need. An audience in Microsoft 365 can be an Azure AD group. It can be some dynamic AD groups, and the goal will be to support all dynamic AD groups, or it can be a Microsoft 365 group. A DL does not count as an audience, so you need to think really beyond the DL. So I'll give you a good example of a target audience that would be helpful to think about as you're creating content, and that is new employees. And so assuming that you have in your profile a start date, you could imagine an audience that picks up or puts together people who have a start date between X date and Y date. That's an example of a dynamic AD group that you would need to create, but it's important to know that because that's an audience of people who may have specific needs at specific times in their journey in your organization. And to the extent that you can target the set up your benefits kind of activity to a new employee, you would basically be creating a more holistic and personalized experience for them. But those audiences have a bunch of other places that they can be used. And right now we can deliver audiences. We can use them with pages, navigation, news pages, regular pages, and news pages. We can use audiences to target events, the quick links web part, and soon with the resources part of Microsoft Viva applications as well. So we have content, and then we have web parts that today leverage audiences. So the news web part, you may have seen that in the news web part, highlighted content, quick links, most recently events, and then as we get Viva Connections deployed, the Viva Connections dashboard is going to allow you to target the little apps that you deliver using those same audiences. So again, if you have those audiences, there's a lot of use cases for them, and you don't even need to deploy Viva Connections to get value from audiences because we can and have already been able to use them in so many different places. I'm going to take a little breath and see if anyone has any questions about that. Okay. No questions? I'll keep going. I could talk about this forever. All right. So the other thing I think you really want to think about when it comes to an intranet is governance. And so I mentioned that, the care and feeding of your intranet is critical to making it useful. And so if you don't have a plan to focus on governance, your intranet is going to become like the Roach Motel, where content checks in and it never checks out. And when that happens, that's basically going to mean people will stop caring, because if all I find is outdated information when I search or when I browse for content, I'm not going to trust the content that I find. Now, governance is also about balance. It's about balancing what you're going to allow with what people actually need and making sure that you're managing the risk associated with opening things up too much against what will happen if you lock things down too much. And every organization kind of has a different sort of level of tolerance and a level of need for what they're going to support. But every client that I have always says to me, well, like if I knew all the questions that I was supposed to ask, then I'd be much more effective at planning governance. And I've been asked that question so many times, and I have an entire consulting practice where I focus on that. I have been curating for the last 20 years a collection of governance questions. These questions started out to be very SharePoint focused, and now they're much broader. They cover basically all of, most of Microsoft 365, SharePoint, Office, SharePoint, OneDrive, Yammer, Stream, and Teams. So it's going to cover the basic elements that will be incorporated in your intranet. It's available at this link. I keep it up to date. I think I had to update it twice last week because every time Microsoft gives us another knob and dial to turn, I know there's a new question and a new place where I need to point myself to when I'm consulting, or the people who grab that document, to kind of keep on top of what should we be focused on. It's really a workbook, by the way, where you can not only have the questions, but record the answers in the workbook so that you've got a place where you can use to build not a document. Because honestly, if you build a governance plan and it's a document, I'll promise you one thing, it'll never get read. And so I've learned the hard way that there's no point in documenting your governance plan. What you should do is build a user resource center, a destination that can be used in training by your help desk and for individuals who are going to look up how to do things. You can provide not just how to do it, but how you should do it in your organization. So rather than writing a document, as I said, great intranets are made of pages, not documents. I have a model for creating a, well, let's call it a governance and training delivery site that can be completely integrated with the Microsoft 365 Learning Pathways site. And if you want to know how to do that, you can find it at that link as well. So 2 resources that you can download to help you create an actionable governance plan that will really work in your organization. Ideally, you're going to not allow people, by turning all the knobs and dials in a way that works for you, you won't allow people to make a radical mistake, to allow your information to leak outside the organization in a way that you don't want it to. But, and that's why you're going to answer those questions and then use it to make settings, to adjust the settings in the admin center. But the rest of governance is about the guidance that you give people about their responsibilities, for example, when they own a site. What are my responsibilities on a daily, weekly, monthly, or annual basis? What am I committing to when I agree to take ownership of a part of the intranet? So these are not things that you can block from the admin center. They're things that you have to establish as a rule of engagement for how you're going to, what you're going to allow people and expect people to do to be part of this experience that we know we need to have. So not only do we have to govern our intranet, but we also have to plan how it's going to be organized. And in the land of modern intranet, we have sort of 2 elements to our information architecture. One is about how we are physically creating our site topology, and the other is how are we going to string it all together with navigation. So there's really 2 elements to our modern information architecture. And the one guiding principle that everyone needs to think about is that in the land of modern, the world is flat. And if you're used to that classic SharePoint structure with site collections and subsites, we're just going to ban the S word, because in the world of modern SharePoint, we are crowded with site collections, and we don't even use the word site collection anymore because every site stops at that site. So although it is technically a site collection in SharePoint, we don't create subsites as a general rule in modern SharePoint, and we can't create a subsite on our intranet, which will be primarily comprised of communications sites which don't support a subsite underneath them. So if you're currently living in a classic SharePoint world, this is a really important concept because you're going to be blowing up the physical structure of where you are today as you modernize. Now, here's the thing, you don't have to do it all at once. You can have a bit of a Franken intranet as you're migrating from your flat, highly organized, beautifully integrated structure from your classic structure. But typically what I'm going to do is make at least that home navigation site in the cloud and direct people to start there. And then as many sites, as many concepts that are modernized will be directly on sort of in the modern flat structure. And then we may link back to either content on-prem or content in classic until everything is modernized. So we don't have to launch our modern experiences with a big bang. We can get there gradually over time. I'm in the middle of a couple of those kinds of deployments right now. As we're building our information architecture, we're going to focus on sort of three elements. One is what becomes a site. The second is what is a hub, and I'll talk a little more about that. And the third is what is just going to be a page on an existing site. I wish that this was very, very scientific and I could give really structured, always do this guidelines for how to determine this. And unfortunately, it just doesn't really work that way. There's a little bit of an art and there are best practices to determining what gets to be what. But the first decision you're typically making is, do I need a site? And for me, these four criteria typically drive what gets to be a site. I'm going to flip the order a little bit. In general, the site has to be centered around an individual topic. But what tends to drive is something going to be its own site for me is who are the people who are managing and maintaining it. Because I don't, as a general rule, you want to manage permissions at the site level. And if there is an area of the site where you want unique people to manage it, and that area includes pages, I would highly recommend that you consider creating a separate site for that topic for all kinds of reasons, including is it a unique kind of a topic? Might that topic move around in the organization so it won't always be connected to this main topic? And is there a unique group of people that need to manage and maintain it? The easy decision for what gets a site is if you know that that topic is only for a short period of time. So I have an organization that is creating a site, a communication site for their DE&I week. Well, that word week, that's a big clue that it should just be a site for that event, but perhaps connected to a more permanent site about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the individual sort of what are we doing in DE&I week in 2021 will get its own site that will basically go away or get hidden until we have the 2022 version, in which case all the content might be replaced, but will no longer be active necessarily in the intranet. And so time is actually a good way to tell, do I need a site? So it's a little bit of a balance of ownership, how much content we have, and notice that I don't say anywhere that this has anything to do with the organization chart, although often we're going to have multiple sites that relate to the same entity in an organization chart. And so, you know, while you may think, well, why don't we just make department sites and kind of leave it at that? The challenge, of course, is that sometimes the way that you organize your company is more about span of control and less about function. And so what we're really talking about is topic and function that we may actually need to combine in different ways to tell a great story. So for example, in one of my clients, IT belongs to the finance organization, but I promise you, no one is going to finance to look for IT. They are thinking of IT as a separate entity. So what we don't want to do is make IT a page on the finance site, because that doesn't make logical sense. It's a different group of people managing that content. And it's, while it may organizationally report to finance, it is logically a separate topic. So that's a great reason to give IT one or maybe even more than one site of their own. And while I really thought that I didn't have to do this, answer this question anymore, lately I've been learning that we still also need to talk about, well, okay, site, what do you mean by site? And what kind of site do I actually need? And in the land of SharePoint, there are really only two basic sites, just to simplify. There's a team site, And that's where I think of a team site as a place where I'm going to collaborate to get work done, where the purpose is, the intent of this is to work collaboratively with other people. And what's important about a team is that everybody has the same permissions. We're all editors of the content. Intranets are most often built on a foundation of communication sites. And the entire purpose of a communication site is to basically broadcast or communicate to a wide group of people, where a small number of people are editing, but a very large number are reading. Now, you can absolutely have a private communication site, and you can have areas on a communication site where a broad group of people can contribute and or edit content. In general, your intranet is not going to be a collection of team sites. It will be a collection of communication sites, and communication sites are really built on a foundation of pages, not documents, because really your intranet is about storytelling, and we want to basically create a series of stories that help users get work done. And rather than throwing a bunch of documents at them, if you do need to share a document, what you want to think about as an intranet is, how can I add context to that document so that people know when and how to use that document in their work. And in most cases, that document is presented for read, like a policy, not so that you can edit it. So one of the challenges, one of the things we loved about our legacy intranets is that concept of a site and a subsite really helped us string things together and manage them as an entire entity. More importantly, it allowed us to easily have shared navigation across that entire family. Well, in the land of modern, if everybody is their own thing, there are some things that we did like about that, kind of the way we could connect sites. And that's really the problem that hubs answer. So a hub is effectively a family of related sites. And one of the superpowers that it has is that it automatically gives you a shared search scope for that entire family. So most HR examples, for example, are more than one site. And what's really nice about having an HR hub is if I go there and execute a search, I'm looking across the entire family, not the entire intranet, the entire family of HR. If I'm on any one individual site in HR and I don't find, or on one individual member site and I don't find what I want, search has kind of an up-level breadcrumb that would allow me to extend that search, but still stay within the HR family of sites. What's great about hubs is that because our families are made up of independent sites, if a topic moves from one hub to another, no links to that topic break. Because again, anytime we were linking to that entity as an individual site. So hubs allow you to change your mind about how you're creating families and not break any links, and effectively re-architect either your navigation or your search experiences conveniently and easily to align with sort of changing your mind, which is really an aspect of most intranets. And then, of course, the last and the lowest level entity is, do I need a page? And typically when I look at, do I get to be a site or do I get to be a page? This is probably the most art of all of this. And it's really, if it's the same people managing and the topic is highly related to the topic of the site as a whole, I would probably make a page, but sometimes pages grow up and they need to be sites of their own. Usually it's because a different collection of people need to manage the content. So Danielle has a question. Should we consider hubs for standalone SharePoint sites or even use it for Microsoft group sites? Great question. That, of course, depends. So an individual SharePoint site does not need to be a hub. You need to have people who, other sites to be part of a family. Can you use a hub with team sites or Microsoft group connected sites? The answer is yes, and I'll give you a scenario for how you might do that. So in the land of hubs, I have a whole presentation on what should be a hub, but just in general, I think there's only 3 types. One is functional or organizational, like HR. The second is geographic or location based. So imagine a hub for Austria, and Austria HR is connected to that hub, Austria Legal, Austria Quality. What distinguishes that entire family of sites is that perhaps they're all in German. And while there may be a global HR site, the global HR site might include a link to the Austria HR site, but to create a search scope for people who work in Austria, we may want to connect Austria HR, managed by a team in Austria, content created in that language, to the Austria hub. And so location or geography is another common reason. And the third is portfolio. And I'll give you an example. There's a couple of examples of a portfolio. One is we do a lot of different work for different major clients. So I work with some federal organizations that provide services to USAID. And if you're working with a federal agency, there's a contracting representative. There are probably templates and other kinds of things that are needed for every project associated with that client. So you could make a portfolio. You could take a site where you have all of those program-wide resources for that client in that main site, and then all of the individual project sites, which are group connected team sites or group back team sites, are then connected to that portfolio hub. It gives you a search scope that lets you look for all content and share the content and knowledge and experiences for USAID related projects, and it just makes that easier to find. So 3 models, another example actually is I often create a hub for archive content. And so when we no longer need content, you can create a hub and then associate content or sites that are no longer needed to an archive to give you a way of looking at the portfolio of no longer active sites as well. So that's another kind of example. So Mike says we use a hub to connect several functional department, team, and content records project sites for the org units. Not quite sure what you mean, but I promise you, if you can challenge me on this, but every time I've been challenged before, your model is going to be function, organization, location, geography, or portfolio. And someone did try to challenge me on that archive model, and I thought, brilliant idea. However, it still is a portfolio, so a portfolio of related sites. So I think that's another great model, and I wish I could take total credit for it, but credit goes to Stefan Bauer. I agree, it's a brilliant idea. So yeah, function org is a way to create a hub, although I could argue that might be your hub, but you probably don't want to make your navigation exclusively function or organization. And so this is where we can, if you cannot break that organizational mindset for sites, you have an opportunity in navigation to create an experience to guide people through to what they need to get work done independent of where things live. So one of the things I see on a lot of these award-winning intranet sites is an area called something like employee essentials. And in that area of the mega menu, there might be sort of the most frequently needed content that is cross-functional. And rather than being organized organizationally, it's presented topically. So there might be a category called travel, and in there would be expense reporting and travel booking or something like that. Or my benefits, and where you might link to, or about me or something where you might link to the benefits site, your my pay site, which may or may not be in SharePoint at all, but sort of things that are related to me, my work, my life and career, and then have links that may or may not all be associated with an individual department. One of the gifts that we get with Viva Connections, actually a precursor to Viva Connections is what is rolling out in this month to all tenants, and that is the SharePoint app bar. Because what we've never had in SharePoint Modern is global navigation. So as an information architect, it's obviously something that I've wanted for a really long time. I've never seen an award-winning intranet that doesn't have global navigation. And I was offered the Microsoft team, I did a podcast with them and I was offered, so what if we gave you $100? What would you spend it on in terms of features? And I basically said, all 100 on global navigation. Even though I had all kinds of reasons why you absolutely didn't need it, it's just that everybody wants it. And so you just have to do it. And that's really what the SharePoint app bar provides. It allows you to create persistent and consistent navigation everywhere in your intelligent intranet. But it's more than just global navigation. It includes other elements as well. It's not just your nav, but it's also something that nobody ever went to, but was my favorite place in SharePoint, which is just the SharePoint link itself, the SharePoint start page, where I can quickly find my frequent sites, the sites that I'm following. This is the gift to an information architect is I don't have to worry about getting it 100% right, because everyone has their own personal IA based on what they do. And that will follow you around in a way that makes it much easier to find than the SharePoint link, which nobody seems to click on. The other thing that the app bar does is it saves room in your navigation, because a lot of times people put news as an element of their nav. You don't need to, because news will follow you around in the news icon that comes with the app bar. This news is already personalized to you, but it'll get even a bigger boost of personalization if you use audience targeting, because audience targeted audiences are recognized in the news feed. And so this will surface for you content that is recommended for you and content from the sites that you're explicitly following. And finally, this information, my files, was not available to you in the SharePoint start page. The way you'd see this most likely would be if you start your day at office.com. So what the app bar is doing is bringing some content that is relevant to you, highly personalized to you, plus content that guides you through the resources in the organization, all in one place. If you want to have Viva Connections, you're going to need the app bar, because one of the key elements, the first one that gets delivered in Microsoft Teams, is your global navigation. So I'm not going to read through this, but I'll tell you that there are some typical patterns for global navigation. I am working with a client right now that has not only not reflected this pattern, but they're also following they have over 130 or 40 items in their global navigation. I can tell you right now, A, it won't work. B, one of the criteria for global navigation is it has to be something that is used by the majority of people on a regular basis. Things we need all the time, not things we need only occasionally. And it should be top level categories. It's a wayfinding tool, but you do not need to have a hyperlink to every page in your intranet. Also, Microsoft has some performance guidelines that basically say you want to keep the number of nodes in your navigation to fewer than 100. So I could spend 8 hours on this. In fact, I do. I teach a whole entire workshop on this. So I'm just going to say focus on major items, elements, and take my workshop if you want to learn more. All right. So now we're going to get to a little bit of the things that you must have in order to take advantage of Viva Connections. Viva Connections isn't going to build your great intranet for you. You've got to do all these things I've been talking about to even start thinking about Viva Connections. But in order to do Viva Connections, the other thing you're going to need is a modern communication site that you designate as your home site, meaning the landing page for your intranet. That's really what the home site is designed to do, but it doesn't have to be at the root of your tenant. It can be, does not have to be, but in order to take advantage of Viva Connections, you need to run the PowerShell that takes a communication site and makes it your one and only home site. Right now, you can only have one, and you'll need that because that is one of the elements that you need to feed into the script to bring your intranet into Teams. So to make a great home page, you want to make sure that it looks great, that it's highly personalized, I have a whole other talk we can give sometime about what makes a great homepage, but here's what I'll say. In order to make a great homepage, and really any page, you really have to understand, for whom am I building this content? What do they want to learn? What do they need to do? And you need to keep the reader in mind as you are creating that content. And rather than doing the whole Marie Kondo thing and saying, did you spark joy? No, you don't have to do that, but you do have to look at everything you're going to put on the homepage of any site, home, or any site, and say, have you earned the right to be on my homepage? Are you a broad enough category or a narrow enough category that you're going to help people find what they need? And are you a broad enough category, and have I labeled you in such a way that I'm not going to break a promise to my reader because they have no clue what this means? So you really want to think about who's coming here, what do they need to do? And while you can do all you want with rotating objects and stuff like that, no one is coming back to your home, your intranet, because it looks beautiful. It has to look beautiful, but they're not coming back because it looks good. They're coming back because it helps them get work done. So you can ask me another time. I'll show you my example of the worst homepage I've ever seen. What it had was a hero web part, and in each of the 5 tiles of the hero, they had a different GIF. So each one is rotating or turning in a different direction. First of all, it completely fails to meet any accessibility standards. And one thing that I am a stickler for is intranets need to be built for everyone, which means alt text on images and run the accessibility checkers that are available to you to make sure you are building sites and themes that have the right kind of contrast. Use headings. Don't use heading 3 before you use heading 1. Again, things that help make your page and your sites effective for all readers. But if you're going to have 5 different rotating images, all doing all kinds of different things, you're actually, screaming for someone to have a seizure. So you really do want to think about that as you're making your beautiful pages. All right, so now how does this all string to Viva Connections? And so rather than talking, I think you've all talked a little bit about what's in everything in Viva. The part that's most relevant to the intranet is Viva Connections. And basically, Viva Connections is the element of Viva that allows you to bring your beautiful SharePoint intranet into Microsoft Teams. It doesn't create the intranet for you. I'm quoting myself here, by the way. It gives you a framework and a model for thinking about it, and a lot of the tools that you're going to need to make that great experience. So Microsoft calls it your gateway to a modern experience, but when your users see Viva Connections in your organization, it won't be called Viva Connections. It's going to be called whatever you decide to call it, whatever you've named your intranet. So in my demo tenant, I call it the intranet. And the icon I use to represent it is a little present, because I think of global navigation as a gift that Microsoft gave to me. So that's really all about it. If you're Microsoft, in fact, they call it Microsoft. And so you're not required to keep the Viva Connections name. In fact, you'll probably not want to. You want the name to reflect your intranet. So what is in this Viva Connections things? Really, there's 3 big experiences. I'm going to try to go through this really quickly. One is resources. And so for right now, this is really the app bar. In the fullness of time, as Microsoft likes to say, this is going to include Viva, the resources experience will include the apps that you're going to, other things that you can deliver to your users. But for right now, because we only have the desktop version of Viva Connections, effectively, when you click on the Connections icon in Teams, what you expand is the global navigation. So this was earlier referred to as the home site app for Teams. And so again, you're going to need a home site. And your home site does not have to be a hub. That's a whole other conversation we can have. But you will want to have global navigation. So the second experience is the feed. And this part is not yet released, but the goal is to have a news web part that a news experience that includes not just news from SharePoint, but announcements from Yammer and Teams all in a single place. So an integrated experience personalized for you, the user. Again, a lot leveraged with audience targeting. And then the third element is probably for me, again, many intranets were already doing this, but for me, this is really the most exciting part because Microsoft is delivering an easier way to do kind of micro integrations or microservices inside the Teams and SharePoint platform. So a lot of there's nothing, for the most part, many of the apps and the experiences, you can get them natively from the browser, and you'll also be able to get them inside the Teams app and sometime later this summer on your mobile device as well. So the dashboard is where you're going to create little app cards in an experience that can be everything from as complicated as just deploying a SharePoint framework app, or as easy as hyperlinking to something that exists already. So cards can also be targeted to audiences. So we keep coming back to the fact that in order to really take advantage of all the gifts that Viva brings, you're going to need to understand who are the audiences in my organization, who are those key personas, and what resources, tools, and apps do they need. So you need to have done the design work to understand your key personas, and then you need to manifest those personas in groups, either in Azure AD or as Microsoft 365 groups. And of course, the best part of all of this is that this is all included with your E3 and E5 licenses. So if you haven't already done this, as I said, one of my favorite parts of the entire Viva experience is that it's encouraging every organization to bring the right people together, to have the right conversations, to think more holistically about the experiences we're delivering to our employees. And so sort of my last point about intranets in general is, you know what? You're going to have to plan for change because you're really never done. And so I think you need to think about how are we going to build a champions program, which I think is really key to making sure that there's a team of people throughout the organization that are committed to sharing what they know about good practices, that are interested in learning more about what's new and what's coming in SharePoint, so that you've got not just the intranet team at headquarters focused on this, but an army of people who are also committed. You need to be realistic about the fact that you need to continuously invest, and it's important to invest in measurement to understand what's being used, what is the most active content, what are people searching for and not finding, because that could be a big clue about content that you need to create. So you not only need a metrics program, but you need commitment to act on what you learn from measurement. And then, of course, I think something that we often forget when we're planning and deploying intranets is that this is not going to be intuitive to every person in the organization. Just like all those people that have asked, Andy, how do we turn off the app bar? It may not be intuitive to even the people that are paying attention. And so we do need to think about training, ongoing training, and resources to make sure that we're empowering people with the tools they need to be effective with all of the new superpowers that we're bringing to them. And I can promise you that if you think about all of these things, you'll have an intranet that meets or exceeds expectations. And I think ultimately, you'll be able to take the best advantage of Viva and all of the superpowers that brings. And that's all I got. Sorry, this is more than 10 slides, but it's really hard to tell this story without giving that bigger picture. So thanks for hanging in there. And I'll stick around if people have questions.
I think I speak for everyone when I say that was amazing. I'm glad you went more than 10 slides. That was really good stuff. I know the links are the click measures on the downloadable links are probably going to go way up after tonight, especially with this group. So this has been something that a lot of us have been struggling with, or trying to really dive into. So thank you. That was really good.
My pleasure.
let's see. I'm just going back. We'll get through the Q&A.
I have a question, kind of a question, more of a statement. So what I'm, and I don't know if Kelly's still on, but this will be news to him. But so one thing we're kind of looking at doing is seeing the feasibility of using Viva, not for our intranet, because we already have a very extensive intranet in our organization, in a different platform. But we use SharePoint for resources for all of our users, all of our site owners, all of anybody in our organization that wants to learn more about Office 365. Right now it's just a standard site, communication site.
Right.
So what we're going to look at doing is integrating Viva for that, making
So
that.
I'll tell you what I have a client doing, something like that.
Okay.
But I'll tell you, here's what I would tell you. Don't make that site, the one that's your Microsoft 365 help site, don't make that your home site. Create another home site, because you're going to want a placeholder for when you move your intranet. So create that placeholder site. However, link your help site. Make it very obvious, make it part of the hero, or maybe it's the only link on that homepage. And the reason I think you ought to do that is that allows for, that kind of future proofs what you're about to do. From an experience perspective, you can change what people see on the homepage, but you don't really have to touch what is the home site. That also gives you a way to provide global navigation that is beyond just your SharePoint help. Because that global nav, by the way, those resources, they don't have to be only to your SharePoint intranet. You can have them point to your non-SharePoint intranet as well. You just need a URL. That's all nav is looking for. And so if I click on that from Microsoft Teams, a URL that's going to your intranet that isn't in SharePoint, what will happen is it'll just open a browser for me. And again, the whole, what the brilliant part of Viva Connections is it allows me to, I think of Teams as the new desktop. So basically I'm working in Teams. If your intranet is in Teams, it allows you to scope it to Teams or the entire intranet. And so there's a great search experience as well. And if your entire intranet is in Teams, obviously is in SharePoint, Microsoft will be much happier with you. However,
of course,
there is absolutely no reason that you can't take advantage of that global navigation to point you to your other intranet. And I actually have a client that's doing that.
Gotcha. Okay, good information for sure.
You were the second one to ask her that, because when Sue and I were putting together the talk about this, we had that exact conversation.
Yeah.
About that. Yep.
Cool.
So yes, Mike, your main intranet homepage is your home site. That is, I don't know what is normal these days, but yes, that is the typical, what I would say is that, yes, that is the typical pattern, is that the intranet, and it's also usually the root of your tenant, and because it has the shortest URL, and that kind of makes the most sense. So
right, and that's what we're looking at doing, is kind of rehashing how our root site is and how it links to our learning site and this and that and the other thing, and looking at how Viva is gonna, if Viva can help with that. So we're actually gonna test it out in our dev environment first, and we're gonna see if it does work for us.
I can promise you it's going to work. I'm already doing it. So I promise you it is going to work. It's really a matter of, first, in fact, I know, I think one of the beauties of SharePoint is you don't have to build it in a dev environment. I would actually decide, what is that landing page experience? What is it that I want people to get when they land? And in your case, it isn't just SharePoint help. You may really want to guide people to your intranet. So again, everything is about understanding what problems am I solving, and who am I solving those problems for? It shouldn't be about what you want to say. It should be about what I, as your reader, wants to learn. And it's a little bit of a balance, but mostly it's about me. And so if you have to make a trade-off, it's always in favor of the reader, not the content producer. SharePoint help is, yes, one thing, but I might, as if this is where I'm doing my daily work, if we're using Teams for collab and some other site for some other platform for our intranet, I am likely to want to be able to get to some things quickly, like benefits or update my this, or update my that, things like that. And I think you will want to really carefully think about the experience in the app bar and then therefore the Connections tab to guide people. And again, your homepage might be something temporary. That's what my client is doing right now. They're creating something in Teams that doesn't mimic the intranet, because one of the things they're trying to figure out how to do is, can they bring in their classic news? They're in classic SharePoint. Can they bring classic news onto their modern homepage? Sure, code or convert it. And we did this on another client, as we converted the classic news to modern news, and we just told them start creating all the news in modern, or continue to do, we'll write the code, we'll run the code every night. I mean, you can think about that to create that meaningful experience, but again, you can use the nav to get people places. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. That's good information. I just took a bunch of notes. So
Mike's got a question.
Yeah.
Starts with a statement. Their corporate communication folks are very picky about news, and they want to own all of the edits and publication of any news. And he thinks that's holding back. Any thoughts on persuading them to open up? Or if you don't mind, I have a couple of things to add to that. So news is a service in this ecosystem, and so you publish news and it publishes as a page in the site, and there's a web part that pulls from it, but you can publish it to hubs and SharePoint Home and the mobile app, so it shows up in like 6 separate places. But you can also have more than one news service. You can register multiple sites as a news source, and you can publish news from all of them. But when you set a home site in your tenant, you take like the root, you run the PowerShell, you set it as a home site, that designates it as a special news site. And so whenever information is published from there, there's an icon that shows up on the news article, no matter where it happens to pop up or show, like SharePoint Home, for instance. It gives it a little icon, and that designates that as home news. And then the other news sites don't have that, but those news articles from those other sources can still reach the users where they happen to work.
Yeah, so I see this a lot. So first, what you're talking about is designating a site as organizational news. And when you make a home site, that site automatically becomes an organizational news source. You can have as many organizational authoritative news sources as you want, and they each get that banner. However, most orgs limit it to sort of key functional areas. What I've seen in that scenario, where mostly CorpCom wants to control what shows up on the homepage, is that there is that news that Andy's talking about, the news published on the home site, is put in one area, usually on top so that they get credit. And then news from other places can get pulled into other news web parts. And so the other thing about your news web parts is you can consume content from one or more sites. And no matter where the content is coming from, if the news web part is audience enabled and the news articles are tagged with an audience, you will get this combination of personalization and targeted, specialized news, departmental news on the homepage. So CorpCom can control the key areas of news, but you could also pull in content from other news sources to, again, create a more personal experience for me, the reader. Because again, the more that homepage is about me, the more I might actually go there to see it. The worst thing for a corporate communicator is if someone doesn't look at the news. And so what we want to do is get a chance at their eyeballs. And I think that's one way to do it, is to just put more personalized information, but put it in a clearly distinct area so that CorpCom knows what they control and everything else is in like a sort of a lesser area, if you will. Can our functional hub be set in a way to restrict news to a subset of the organization? 100%. So one of the things that a hub allows you to do is roll up everything from the hub, but you're not required to do so. So we had a scenario at one of my clients where we were on the main homepage, we were rolling up from the 13 sort of top departments. And one of them, IT, happened to be publishing 5 news articles a day. And so the main news area, corporate news, had news from CorpCom and news from all the functional areas as well. Oh no, actually we separated CorpCom news. So official corporate news was in one web part, and then we were pulling in functional news. And the problem was IT was publishing 5 articles a day, and we only had space to show 12. And because of that, nobody else was getting a word in edgewise because IT was publishing so much. So we had 2 choices. We either tell IT, we remove them, we could stop rolling in IT news or put it in its own container and select only the other ones, or we had a little conversation with the IT news publisher saying, you shouldn't be publishing 5 articles a day. Why don't you think about consolidating and maybe publishing 1 at most 2 a day and spread things out over the week so that you don't crowd out all the other departments that want to reach a broad audience. So you are not required to roll up news. You can select which sites you want to roll up. And then the other really important thing is you also don't have to roll up anything. You can curate which articles on those other sites you want to feature on the home page. When you do that, if you curate an article, you'll effectively be making a news link, not necessarily rewriting the article. When you do that, that news link actually does get the corporate news banner. So it does elevate the experience of that article, but it takes the reader to that other location as well. And so you can write a post and link to the article, you can make a news link and go directly to the article, or you can just take that site out of the roll-up. And by the way, you don't need a hub in order to do a roll-up. Any news web part can roll up content from any sites you choose. And actually, my other sort of tip of the day is you can also filter the content so that you're selectively rolling up content from your family of sites. So it is actually technically possible to have a set of metadata that you use consistently on all of your sites where you're tagging a news article on each functional site with "show me on the home page," kind of a flag. And we used to do this a lot in Classic. To do that in Modern, you need to create the best way to do it is create managed metadata that indicates with that flag. And then in each site pages library, each site, make sure that you have a site column that you use in site pages that is called homepage feature or something like that, feature on homepage, whatever you want the name of it to be. And when that flag is set, and then the next thing you have to do is you have to go into the search schema at the root of the tenant. It's a teeny bit complicated, and map all of those attributes to an available refinable string. And when you do that, those refinable string, let's say 100, whatever you map it to, that is now available as a filter in managed properties in the news web part. So that will allow you to selectively roll up content from other sources. So that is a complex thing to do, but it is doable. So you need to know a little bit about search and how you map properties to search. But news, we didn't used to be able to do this, but you can filter news as you are rolling it up. You just have to plan for it.
Crystal had a question about they're getting ready to start a new intranet from the ground up. So what advice do you have during the planning phase to draw out what are pages, libraries, or hubs?
Well, I gave you in the slides, and Andy, I sent them to you, and so you could actually share them. It's not if I could tell you an exact science rule, I would give it to you. So basically what you're looking at, I think, start with the 2 easiest are amount of content and span of control. Who's going to be managing and maintaining that content? And if it's a unique group of people, that's easy. You get a site. Or if it's a concept that is organizationally part of that department, but not topically part of it. I'll give you the concept, travel. Every organization puts travel in a different structure in the org chart, but it doesn't belong to finance. It's not related to finance, even if finance manages it. One organization I worked with, the travel team reported to supply chain. Nobody new to the organization is going to go looking for travel as belonging to supply chain. So it's clear to me that travel has to have a site. Can't be a page, has to be a site. And the reason is that we are very likely to move that around in the organization. And so I don't want to be dependent on the org chart. And so there's no harm in having more sites. So if you're in doubt and and again, different people, unique topic, make a site. It doesn't cost you anything really to have a site. And that gives you the most future-proof flexibility. Unless you know that there's just no content other than a single page and it's topically related to something else, then I would do a page rather than a site. But again, I'm going to give the classic consultant answer. It depends. And so I spend a lot of my life deciding, should this be a page? Should this be a site? I don't know. My gut tells me it should be a site. Okay, go with my gut. And then, oh crap, I shouldn't have made that a site. And recently I actually had an intranet where they had made, it's 5, we'll call this 5 optimistic sites, meaning they thought they would have a site, but they weren't touching and doing anything on them. And so in their legacy intranet, they had 5 sites, each of which had 2 or 3 documents and 1 page. So I said, this is ridiculous. Based on everything I know about the organization, this is going to be 1 site, 5 pages, and maybe 1 document library for each collection of content so that the different teams of people can put their stuff in their own drawer and they won't get mixed up with other people's stuff. And that has turned out to be a much easier way to find things, because now I don't have to make a hub to connect all those sites together. It's really just pages. So that. Is it bad to have a lot of sites with only 1 page? That is outdated. Yes. And that's a good way to tell, should it be a site or a page? If no one's ever done anything, for some reason in legacy SharePoint, everybody thought that in order to get a page, you had to create a site, and then they never put anything on it except the home page. That's a good, with no documents or 3 documents and a home page, that probably doesn't need to be a site unless there's plans. And so, again, you have to know the organization and know whether they'll ever be at that level of maturity to add more content. So the organization I'm working with right now, I know them really well, and I'm like, 1 site, this is going to make my life easier. And if that site needs to grow up to be a page, great. Well, as page needs to grow up and be a site, we can break it up later.
Just looking back through, I think we got most everything.
Mike, that's the $1 million question. We struggle with business folks owning sites. Any advice out there? I mean, this is really, I think, one of the problems that Microsoft Viva really brings to the forefront. I can't tell you always how to be 100% successful with your intranet, but I can 100% tell you how to fail. And that is, it's only IT. If IT is the only part of the organization maintaining the content, you will 100% be out of date, because the people who know the answer are going to forget to tell IT, or there just will be that time lag. And so I would basically say, stop the project unless you gain commitment from the business. Think of your intranet as an asset for the business. And in order to be successful, business and IT need to sit as a partnership. And legacy SharePoint was ridiculously hard for normal people, regular people who aren't IT, to maintain. But this is not your grandmother's SharePoint. It is much easier. You can drag and drop images and content onto the page. Editing a page is a much different process. So I have found that gaining commitment to maintain modern SharePoint is much easier. And what I try to create is a framework so that it is super easy for people to know where and when to update things. And, don't forget, you need to train them and have a team of people who are available to help when you have questions. And I think not leaving people on their own, having those resources. If you're a large enough organization, even a small one, a Yammer community for intranet site owners is a great way to, each one teach one kind of thing. And I think, again, those champions in the intranet can help you help the rest of the organization.
Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I don't think you took a breath that entire time. but I think I speak for everyone. It was really great information. I've just been watching the comments and the kudos coming through. I know I learned a few things that need to go back and learn a little bit deeper, but it's always good whenever we're able to get you to talk about the awesomeness that is the intranet and what it can actually be, and helping to, I know I speak for the community when I say like moving Microsoft and pushing them in the direction to continue to make this better. You are definitely in the forefront of that, so thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here. It was fun putting this together because it was a good opportunity for me to sort of try to tell that story. And as I said, I wish I could have done this in 10 slides.
I think we benefited from 40 plus slides. It was really good. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
There are a few people asking how they can follow up with you, Vince, and so forth.
Let me share my screen again. So I have a website, and that's where you can find out where my events, so the events that are happening. My next big and maybe last online workshop on information architecture is going to be the 28th of this month at the crack of dawn, because it's for the European SharePoint community. So it'll start at 5 a.m. Eastern. But you'll have your whole day after the session. So I'm going to do a workshop on information architecture, which is so much fun to teach because things change all the time. I'll be doing that workshop again at the SharePoint conference in Las Vegas in person. So I hope to see everybody there. But if you're
Orlando?
And Orlando, I am going to be remote.
All right, in person.
So,
oh, sorry, in person, Las Vegas.
Yeah, I won't be in person in Orlando. I'll be in person in Vegas in December, but not in Orlando. So, so I have a couple different sessions I'm doing in Vegas. In Orlando, I forget what I'm doing. I don't even remember, but in Orlando, I'm doing a session remotely. And then the information architecture workshop, I do that. And I'm also doing that, by the way, at Chicago at SharePoint Fest, which is also that will be my first in-person event.
Daniel and I will be there as well.
In 18 months, which is crazy. I made a deal that I wasn't going to go do any in-person conference until I'd seen my children. And so one is coming one is this weekend, and then the other they'll be fully vaccinated the week of Orlando, and I'm not going to Orlando until I've seen my kids. So yeah, so this is how you can find me and follow me and all that stuff.
Well, thank you so much once again. It's really great to see you. Can't wait to see you in Chicago face to face in July. That'll be a lot of fun. But thank you for being here tonight. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. Let you breathe. Take a step back. Hopefully, wrap up from the workday. But great presentation. And with that, everyone, that is our May 20 meeting. We'll see you at the next one. We'll be posting that in the near future. But thanks, everybody. Have a great night, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.